Kia ora, Shaneel.
Kia ora.
I'm so excited to be here with you this morning.
I can't take you seriously.
I know. Could you please introduce yourself?
Can I?
Yes.
Well, I'm Shaneel. I use they, them pronouns, or he, him pronouns. I'm comfortable with that as well. And I guess you'll learn more about me as we start talking.
Yes. So where did you grow up, Shaneel?
Oh, I was born in Fiji, in a little village outside the capital of Fiji. And then when I was about 14 years old, my parents were like, okay, we got to move to New Zealand. And so at 14, in 2014, I moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand. But Fiji was an eventful time.
Explain. Like, what?
Well, you know, I grew up during a time where there was no internet, and the only time you got to see a cartoon was when it came on the TV. So all of the other times you'd be outside, running barefoot with the other kids. And I personally really appreciate that I had that upbringing, that I did not grow up with a phone or TV where you could play whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted. And I think, you know, just all those cuts you get on the bottom of your, on the sole of your foot, it's all, when you look at kids now, it's like they'll never get to experience any of that. And like, I knew every single one of my neighbors when I was living in Fiji. It was just that I knew all of these people by first name. We'd give each other food. That was the amazing thing about living in the islands, is though living here, I don't know who my neighbors are.
Well, it must have been a shock to come here and experience this way of life that we live here. How did you find your footing in this particular country? Well,
you know, I kind of came from a collectivist community that lived by collectivism to South Auckland, which is full of people who come from collectivist cultures but just live in individualistic ways. I mean, it wasn't a cultural shock in the sense that I'd gone from, you know, a brown community to a white community. I went from, you know, a brown community to South Auckland, which is dominated by Pacific people. So that wasn't really a cultural shock for me. What was a shock is when I went to university. It was like I was walking into like a convention of white supremacists.
Okay. What are you studying?
I study law and arts.
Okay. And what do you mean by that? Is it...
Well, you know, sometimes I'd be sitting in, you know, my law lectures and I just hear the people at the back of me and saying, you know, the treaty is nothing, or though like Maori knowledge means nothing, and I just think, oh God, these people feel so confident in an academic space to express those views.
It makes complete and utter sense why you use your voice so strongly and so powerfully. Hearing that sort of rhetoric, you cannot stay sane. As a person, hearing that sort of rhetoric.
Yeah. I guess it kind of became a bit of a rebellion at a very young age, because when I was born in Fiji, it was a crime to be gay. So homosexuality was a crime until I was 10.
Yeah.
And I was in primary school and homophobia was really, really common. In fact, people would use the words, you know, gauri and gandu and chaka and all of these other words that were derogatory terms. So the only way that I could describe my identity were through these insults and derogatory terms, right? So homophobia was quite common. And I think it was the first year of high school, or as Fiji they would call it Form 1. That's intermediate in New Zealand, Form 1. And that's when the Twilight movies started coming out. So me and my other two queer friends were like, okay, we're going to do a drama act for our drama class. And instead of getting, you know, the male and the female married, we got the two guys married.
Oh, the vampire.
The wolf.
Okay.
The vampire and the wolf, and we got in trouble. And I think that's from that early age, I was a bit of a rebel because I just didn't put up with things.
So how were you treated at school then?
Well, I think school was fine in the beginning. But the older I got, the more feminine I got, and the more expressive I got. Because as a kid, I was quite flamboyant, right? I remember in class 2, my friend brought nail polish to class, and we put nail polish on our toenails. Let's start again. Well, what am I doing? In class 2, my friend brought nail polish to class, and we put them on our toenails. And I was wearing Crocs at the time to school. I was rocking Crocs well before it was a trend.
You started the trend.
I started the trend. I was a trendsetter. I had nail polish on my toenails, and my teacher saw it. And she got so angry, she started screaming. And, in class 2, I didn't really understand why a teacher was so mad at me having nail polish on my toenails. And then she said, nail polish is for girls. Boys aren't supposed to wear nail polish. And I was like, well, how could something as little as a little bit of paint on your toenails be something reserved for girls? And I didn't understand it, but I just knew that I wasn't allowed to have all of these things that I liked, all of these vibrant things that I enjoyed. I wasn't allowed to have them. And I think that was my first experience of knowing that I was different or doing things that I wasn't allowed to. And as a punishment, my teacher made me stand in class for the rest of the day, and then you'd hear someone from the back going, "Oh, are you," insert derogatory term, and then that's kind of when you kind of get filled up with all this shame, and you're like, "Oh, I'm different. I'm the odd one out here." And that was when I was 8 years old. And I started learning from all of these outside things that I wasn't supposed to be me.
You speak of a situation in high school where, because of the feminine nature that you hold, you were asked to be prayed for. Would you care to speak on that situation? Is that...
Yeah, I mean, I went into conversion therapy very early in life, as early as, 6, 7, because I was a feminine kid. And it started off as trying to rid you of your feminine energy. So the priest, the church leaders and the temple leaders, they would start with prayers. And then the prayers would escalate to enchanted bracelets. So you'd have to wear this enchanted bracelets that's made of like colored strings. And so the understanding was that there was an evil spirit that was making me queer, and so if I wore these enchanted spirits, that they would rid me of my evil spirit and therefore my queerness. And when that didn't work, they started with social isolation. So I was kept away from the girls so that I wouldn't become more feminine, and I was kept away from the boys so that my feminine mannerism wouldn't pass on to them. So if my queerness or my feminine energy wasn't treated like an evil spirit, it was treated like a virus. And then the enchanted bracelets went to, isolation, went to physical beatings, and it went all the way till I moved. So the only way that I got moved out of my conversion therapy was this abrupt move to another country. And, I came to New Zealand in 2014 and started school at Otahuhu College, and I was there. And in 2017, I was doing extracurricular activities, and that's when I went and started volunteering at Middlemore Hospital. And it was summer of 2017, and I was just sitting at the reception, and this church leader came up to me, and he wanted to pray for me. And I said, no. He wanted to pray my gay away. And I said, no. And he said, it's hot. But do you know what's hotter? Hell. And I was like, oh, I thought this was a thing for, the islands that were not too progressive, but it's completely legal in this country. And, at 6, at 7, at 8, this idea of going to hell was frightening. But at 17, going to hell made perfect sense with my fantasy. If all the gays are going to hell, that's where I want to be.
The party.
That's a party. That's going to be a ball. And I'm ready to walk all the evil categories. I'm walking the Lucifer category. I'm, starting my campaign. As soon as I get to hell, I'm starting my election campaign. I'm throwing Lucifer off his throne.
And you run hell.
I am ready to run hell. That's if I'm going to hell, I'm gonna go and do my best job. Anyway, so 2017, I was a 17-year-old. I just moved to the country, and I had little to no connection with anyone in the queer community or anyone in the political community, and I just kind of felt helpless, and I had no idea what to do about this. But at the end of 2017, I got selected to sit on the Minister of Education's Youth Advisory Group. And it was Chris Hipkins who was the Minister of Education then, Prime Minister now. And that's when I felt like I had control of things that were happening in my life, because I'd spent so much of my childhood having other people tell me how I could live my life and what I could and could not do. 2017, I become a member of the Minister's Youth Advisory Group, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm advising a minister of this country. I've got a bit of control over my life. 2018 was an eventful year. That's the first year New Zealanders petitioned to ban conversion therapy. And towards the end of 2018, I became Jenny Celeste's youth MP.
Yeah.
And then in 2019 was Youth Parliament.
Yeah.
And I just kind of stood up in Parliament and I was like, Madam Speaker.
The speech that rocked the world.
I was like, I was a bit nervous because I didn't know how people would respond. And I said, Madam Speaker, when I woke up this morning, I didn't look in the mirror and say, oops, I'm gay, better fix that. And, Parliament erupted in laughter. And I was like, I am in my zone. Let's do this. And I did my speech. It went viral on the internet. And that's when the movement to ban conversion therapy took off. That was a very convoluted answer to you.
No, the best answer. Thank you so much. So, speak to that campaign. How was it to get the ball moving, and where is it at the moment? Right?
Well,
speak to your success, girl. Go on. I want to hear it all.
At 17, I would have never imagined how big the movement to ban conversion therapy would become. Because, in 3 years' time, the movement to ban conversion therapy held the highest signed petition that was ever tabled in Parliament in this country. That was at about 150,000 signatures. A year later, we had the most submitted select committee, which was 100,000 submissions. That's never been done. And you just had to be there. You just had to be there to feel how phenomenal it was. And, I was burnt out. I really, truly was burnt out throughout the movement. But, the entire time I was in the movement, the only thing I could think of was how I felt when I was in conversion therapy. And I just thought, I can never allow any young person to go through that. And I think, as survivors of conversion therapy, we take on the responsibility to ensure that no one else will experience what we have. And I think so much of that movement was about achieving that. But in hindsight, and now I can speak with the benefit of hindsight, is that it really, truly snatched away my youth from me. Being involved in the movement to ban conversion therapy was a blessing. But it was also a curse. And I kind of developed this platform that, to the outside world, portrayed me as much older. I was merely 17, 18, 19 when I was doing this, but I was getting criticized, by the extreme right, by members of Parliament, by churches, mega churches. And I was kind of just taking it from all directions. It wasn't just the people who opposed the ban and conversion therapy. It was quite literally queer people. So I'd get told by churches that you're going too far. And then I'd come back to my community, the queer community, and I'd get told you're not doing enough. And I just think, well, what am I supposed to do? But truthfully, I think people did not give me any grace. Because I was making all the mistakes that all other young people were making, except my mistakes were broadcasted for 50,000 people to see.
Yeah.
And now I think people weren't actually people weren't giving me constructive criticism. People were just trying to take me down. And I think, in a way, now, if I got a lot of those criticisms, I would deal with them differently. I would probably deal with them in a mature way. But at the time, there was so much pressure on me, and it was coming from so many directions, I quite literally did not give a fuck about what anyone said. And I'd tell people to go get fucked.
Give you a strong backbone, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did.
So, let's go back to your experience with conversion therapy. How was it that it was bestowed upon you? Was Was it just through the monitoring of the teachers? Was it family?
Well, I think one thing you really need to understand about Fiji is that it is a real collectivist community, which means that the elders take care of whoever's children they want. I think people who live in Western society just cannot understand that your neighbor could beat you up. And that would be perfectly fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I'm Maori, we know.
yeah. So it's very that. It's so
Yeah.
our neighbors, all the elders in the village could look after everyone's child, and that would be perfectly normal. And the way that they disciplined kids was through acts that would be considered illegal in New Zealand.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Relate.
beating kids up was very common in Fiji for the purposes of discipline, which means that had I been beaten up by all the other elders, that would not be concerning. It would certainly not be something that you would put under investigation. So I would go to the churches and the church leaders would initiate it. And that was fine, because church leaders and elders were allowed to do this. And I think the collectivist nature of my community kept a lot of my conversion therapy hidden from my family. And I didn't tell my family because some of the terms and conditions of my conversion therapy was that if you do not change, your community will banish you and your family will disown you.
Oh.
So had I gone to my family and said, you know what, these people are trying to pray my gay away, I would have to accept this reality that they could potentially disown me. So the church leaders were incredibly intelligent and strategic.
Yeah.
They exploited the collectivist nature of my community to hide conversion therapy from my family, but they also told me that if my family found out about my sexuality, they would disown me. So I would never go and tell them myself.
Yeah. What was it that broke the camel's back then? Like, was this a discussion that was had before you moved here to New Zealand, or was it just things it was fate that you were able to get out of? Okay.
Maybe that was the miracle that I was waiting for. And
you're whānau and eventually through your lifeline. Yeah.
I mean, it was truly a lifesaver to move.
So when was that discussion? And hopefully they have not abandoned you as you were manipulated to think. Has that conversation been had? And
which conversation?
The conversation about your authentic self and them being able to handle.
I feel like anyone who looks at me, how do you look at me and you still think that I'm not queer? I just can't understand how any ordinary person would look at me and say, oh, this person is not queer. I personally never sat my parents down and said, Mom, Dad, I hope you still love me. I'm gay. I just think that my sister, she was able to bring a boy home without ever coming out. And so why should I do it? And it would be really weird if I sat my parents down and said, Mum, Dad, I hope you still love me, I'm brown. And my mum would just kind of scream, anything but brown.
Yeah.
Like, where did we go wrong? Like, did we not give you enough food as a kid?
Yeah.
But also, I think I just never kind of had the courage when I was young. When I was young, I never really had the courage to come out because this idea of being disowned was just so frightening. And I think that, even when I was young, I was quite tough and strong. And I think that, if I, who was a person who was so strong, struggled to come out to my family because I was so fearful of this idea of being disowned, I just imagine what other young people go through,
Exactly.
But I guess my coming out moment to the world wasn't really like a typical sit-down coming out moment. I was in year 11, and there was this Samoan Christian boy sitting in front of me, and we were doing our speeches. And I was sitting at the back, writing my speech, and this guy sitting in the front, he was writing his speech about the importance of faith. And then he started talking about how homosexuality is a sin. And I pushed back on the idea, and then we got into this really, really heated argument, and we were exchanging insults, and he was thumping his fist on the table, and I just couldn't hold back. And at this one point, all the rugby boys had surrounded us because this guy that I was arguing with was in the rugby team. And I knew that if I kept going, I'd get beaten up. But I just could not stop myself. And I'd never fought for the queer community or myself like that ever in my life before. And at one point in the argument, he picked a chair up and he aimed for me. And I was like, enough. This is enough. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. And I think in that moment, my anger burnt my closet down and exposed me to the world as a raging queer. There was no more hiding. It was that everyone knew that I was queer, and it was everyone had speculated, and now it was confirmed. So I guess my coming out moment was quite literally standing up for myself.
Yeah.
And that set the trajectory. Oh,
Set the trajectory. Yeah.
That set the trajectory for my life.
How is it growing up in a multicultural Fijian family? How has that impacted your views on indigenous trans experience?
Oh my god, my cultural identity has been a bit of a contentious issue for people. And I don't understand why my cultural identity is an issue for other people. That's a personal journey for myself. And that is why I don't answer questions. You know, when people on the internet question me about my cultural identity, I owe people nothing. I owe them dust. But, but
what is it that's coming at you?
For a very long time there was this entire discussion that I wasn't indigenous Fijian, and then after that discussion ended, there's a new discussion that says that I'm not Asian. And when you walk through the world looking like this, and people are still saying that you're not Asian, you kind of realize that it's not the substance that people have a problem with, it's you that they have a problem with. And people will find anything to have an issue with me. So I just don't respond to people on the internet. After you've written for The Guardian, you stop fighting with people who've only written for twitter.com. But I was born in 2000, and that was the year of a coup.
Yes.
And then in 2006 there was another coup. So in my lifetime, I've lived through 2 coups. But the coup in 2000 was a ethnic coup. They called it an ethnic coup because it was a coup led by a small group of They called it the ethnic coup because it was a coup led by a small group of nationalists, indigenous Fijian nationalists, who wanted Indians to leave Fiji. And I happened to be both. So my family was indigenous Fijian and Indo-Fijian. So the way that the coup worked is that they treated Indo-Fijians like second-class citizens, or worse, Indo-Fijians were raped and taken hostage. But all the indigenous Fijians who supported Indo-Fijians were treated the same way. So Here's my family. You've got indigenous Fijians and Indo-Fijians. Indo-Fijians are being treated horribly. Indigenous Fijians who treat Indo-Fijians with respect are also being treated horribly. So the indigenous Fijians now have to go care for themselves.
Right.
And because I didn't look like them, they couldn't take me with them and care for me with them. And that tore my family apart. Quite literally the year I was born. And so I grew up as an indigenous Fijian and an Indo-Fijian in a family that was predominantly Indo-Fijian because I wasn't allowed to live with my indigenous Fijian family, and that was because of a coup. And I think a lot of people who keep picking at me like, why don't you know every single one of your ancestors, why don't you know every single one of your villages, it's like, have you lived through a coup that tore your family apart? The chances are you haven't.
Yeah. So with all of that in mind, from the past, how does one navigate their trans identity within their culture? How did you?
When I moved to New Zealand, in 2017 and 2018 is really when I started coming to terms with my queerness. And in 2018 is when I went to my first Pride parade on Ponsonby Road. And I just looked around myself, and there were very few people who looked like me. There were a lot of, white, gay men, and I just thought, I don't fit here. I don't fit in the queer community because I don't look like them. And I started Googling, and that's when I came across, identities like Hijra, which is, you know, an indigenous Indian queer identity. And I was like, if there is an indigenous queer identity for Indians, there has to be one for Fijians.
Yeah.
And I just had to dig. I was crawling through the internet looking for it, and I found Vakasalewa. And I was like, gosh. And I looked these people up on the internet, and I said, they look like me. This is who I am, you know. We are a community. And I think in that moment, I realized that I wasn't really queer in the sense that I was gay. I was queer in the sense that I was Vakasalewa in Hijra. And I think those identities, you know, indigenous queer identities just do not fit in the neo-colonial framework of LGBTQIA+.
Yeah.
Because indigenous queerness is an intersection of queerness and culture, whereas, you know, the LGBTQIA+ framework is just a mere reference to one's gender identity and sexuality.
Yep.
And I felt like that if I shoehorned myself into that acronym, I would rid myself of my culture.
Yeah.
And so I started identifying as Hijra and Vakasalewa, but because there was just no education about these identities, I had to just find English words to communicate my identity to other people. But also understanding that all of these, you know, all of this new knowledge was coming to me when I was 18. 18-year-olds are not that smart. From my experience, I wasn't the most intelligent 18-year-old. I mean, I was an agitator, I was a busybody, but I wasn't entirely clued on.
So, if you'd had that group from an earlier age, had you seen the people that you saw were exactly like you? Do you think that would have helped at all, finding your community earlier to really?
You know, there was a Hijra living in my village in Fiji, and that's kind of how I learned that's not who I wanted to be from at least the early years of my life. There was a trans woman or Hijra living in my village, and her name was Vicky. And when one day we were coming back from school, and buses in Fiji do not have windows; they are just open. You could jump out if you want to. You could really just jump out if you wanted to, and people did jump out of the buses. So one day from school, we were coming home, and Vicky was, you know, walking to wherever she was going, and the kids just started throwing bottles and spitting on her. And I realized, if I choose to be my true self, that's how I'm going to get treated. And so I guess having Vicky around kind of taught me that if I choose to be my real self, this is how my community is going to treat me. And I think that is one of the reasons I probably did not make a stronger effort to leave conversion therapy, is because not changing meant accepting this reality of being abused.
Because you potentially could end up being Vicky
as
well. But look how brave, you see how brave she is.
But Vicky was a performer, right?
Oh, okay.
So Hijra and Fiji, they have a very integral role in terms of performing and entertainment and arts, right? So they would dance at weddings and they would dance at birthdays. And the thing that I really did not understand is that when I saw Vicky in her ordinary life, people would spit at her and throw rubbish at her and yell insults. But when she performed at the weddings, no one could get their eyes off her. She was the center of attention. She was what people came for. People would go to weddings to watch Vicky perform. And I just couldn't get my head around how people treated her so horribly when she wasn't performing, but absolutely just adored her when she was performing. And I guess later on in life, I learned this. You're only really appreciated as a queer person in the islands if you exist for the entertainment and for the service of people who are not queer.
I think that's the scope for a lot of us Indigenous people, is that if we're not the butt of the jokes, or if we're not making all the jokes, we don't deserve to be seen or heard. But if we're making the punchline, if we're making things look pretty, then that's the only thing we can deliver.
Yeah, and you know, I think queer people are naturally better at entertainment and art, but I don't think we are limited to that.
No. I mean, Hello. Well, that's a good time now to move into present day conversation, unless you guys are...
I just have one quick thing about the coup. I just think that's a really crucial point of how pervasive it was.
Yeah. For the first time in 1999, an Indo-Fijian had become the Prime Minister of Fiji. It was a democratically elected government. However, the racial tensions between indigenous Fijians and Indo-Fijians were so bad that a small group of Itoke or indigenous Fijian nationalists could not have an Indo-Fijian as Prime Minister. So a small group of indigenous Fijians walked into Parliament and took the Prime Minister hostage and made other Indo-Fijian ministers of government resign on gunpoint. And I think a lot of people, when they think of the coups in Fiji, they think it was a bunch of people fighting with sticks. But no, a group of indigenous Fijians took guns into Parliament and made Indo-Fijian ministers resign. So they could, if they wanted to, kill Indo-Fijians.
Oh,
Can you imagine like me, like a baby? Like I think I was a 4-month-old.
Yeah,
I was quite literally like a 4-month-old baby.
You were literally in the center.
And the funny thing is, I grew up in the city. Like I was right next to the city. Like I mean, I wasn't in the city, but I was in the cool zone.
Yeah. Goodness.
God was just like a little bit of oppression.
Yeah, it just puts things into perspective of the people that are coming at you.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know what their lived experiences of life are, but when you've gone through a coup, and when you've gone through two coups, when you've gone through conversion therapy, that's enough, like...
But I guess, what it has done for me, it has done two things. It's given me a thick skin, so I don't really get upset or offended by people, but it's also made me, in a sense, I guess, heartless, because I don't respond to things. So it's good because I don't get offended, but it's also that I don't feel much.
Well, thick skin, yeah. That's what comes with the criteria, I guess. So what direction is your activism taking now in this 2023?
After 5 years of being involved in the movement to ban conversion therapy, at the very end of it, I was burnt out. I was burnt out in the sense that I would sleep for hours and hours and hours, and I just felt tired. And I was in a state of mourning almost. Like I felt like something or someone had died when the movement to ban conversion therapy had ended. I just felt empty all the time, and I just didn't have a purpose or a sense of direction, and I just had no way of connecting to people, because for the last 5 years, the 5 years that I was supposed to, grow up into my person, the last 5 years was when I was supposed to become who I was supposed to be. I had spent working on a movement to ban conversion therapy, so I didn't know who I was when the movement to ban conversion therapy was over. So I just kind of went into a state of mourning, a state of being burnt out, kind of like an empty pot on high flame.
Right.
Because my life, I was on a high, but I just felt so incredibly empty at the time. And then it took me so long to find myself as an individual person. And I told myself that I would never put myself in a situation like that again. So when I think about getting involved in movements of, in queer movements, I have to be very careful that I don't slip back into another one of those movements to ban conversion therapy where my entire identity revolves around the movement.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really tough balance for me to find. But that being said, I have this innate desire to do things. to change things at all times. And so some of the things that I think the queer community needs to focus on now is, lifting the arbitrary ban on gay men from donating blood. There's also the hate speech laws that we need to focus on. Presently in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it is legal to incite violence against queer people as a group. That needs to change. But then there's also the need to focus on bans, because currently it is legal to operate on intersex babies even when it is not necessary. So we have to ban unnecessary operations on intersex babies. I mean, the list goes on, but an individual person cannot do all of those things. So it's an incremental change is where it's at. But also I think people need to step up. Not just queer people, allies.
So we spoke on this briefly, you're studying law. Where do you think that will take you? Well, that is obviously in a direction that will help support everything that you've just said. But like you said, you're only one person.
What if I want to become a commercial lawyer and just make lots of money? No, I'm joking. I could never do commercial law. I started university with an engineering degree. I was studying engineering because I was really good at calculus and physics. But they gave me an electrical board, and I said, I'm not going to touch this. Take it away from me. And I cried and dropped out in the first 2 weeks of university.
Okay.
Then in a brown family, dropping out is a very big deal. I was the first person from my family to go to university, and then to drop out, that was a big move on my behalf. And I'm glad I dropped out of engineering, because I would have been very miserable. I then went on to study law and arts, majoring in psychology. And I guess the arts degree really was the easy one. But the law degree was the more useful one, because it helped me during the movement to ban conversion therapy. I was able to get an understanding of criminal law that other activists did not have. And that kind of gave me an upper hand. But I think about what I will do with my law degree, and I don't think I'll ever practice law. I don't think I have that adversarial personality of winner takes it all. I think a lot of the law profession is about who can present the best argument and win everything, and I don't think I could do that. I have developed a very keen interest in writing and journalism, and I think that would be something that I could do, but I also feel that a lot of people already have plans for me. And that's politics.
I think a lot of people see that.
I'm not going to run. 2023 is not my year.
But you talk more about that. I mean, that's very interesting.
No, it's just I have a law degree to finish. I do think a lot of people go into politics when they're not ready, just for the sake of getting in there and starting a political career early. And I'm not one of those people. I'm not going to go into politics because I want to be famous or a political personality. You go into politics for the right reasons, and that's to help your community. In my speech at Youth Parliament in 2019, I said that as politicians, it is your duty to alleviate the collective suffering of your people. And I stand by that. I think politicians have a duty. But a lot of politicians are not doing that. So I think people would like me to become a politician. A lot of people ask me if I am running for Parliament. But now's not the time. In the future, who knows? Never say never.
You have an Instagram following. I don't have the number.
50,000. Let's just stick
50,000. 50,000. Do you... And I am an avid reader of all the posts that you share, and agree all the time with them. I always find myself in my own room going... How crazy is that? How...
God. No, you're fine.
Your voice is being heard by thousands. Like, is there a responsibility that you have to those people?
Social
Put
media.
me in this space, yeah.
When I was growing up, people were not living on social media. Social media really blew up during the lockdowns.
Yes.
Because people had nothing to do but sit on social media and, watch Instagram, watch Twitter, watch Facebook. And that's when my social media platform really grew. I did not join social media with the hope of having a large social media following. I was just doing what I was doing and people came along. And I think when you're not trying to intentionally develop your social media into a large platform, you're also not preparing yourself to deal with it when it becomes a big social media. So when my social media grew from, having 5,000 followers to then 10, to then 20, then 30, and now 50, it was a bit of a shock because I could no longer post about myself.
Yeah.
So in high school, I would post just random pictures of myself. And now I'm a bit scared to post a picture of myself because people would say, there's a war happening in this part of the world. Why are you having a happy day? Or, this person has lost their home. Why are you drinking lemonade on your story? And, everyone's doing what I want to do, and none of those people get held accountable or to the standard that I'm being held accountable to. And I think it's just that people just expect me to be activist-y and miserable at all times. And so when I enjoy my life on social media, people get upset. People also have this sense of entitlement to my platform, and they think that just because I have a social media platform, I should consistently be giving to other people. It's like, well, that's not my sole responsibility. That's not my... It sounds a bit selfish, but I just can't sustain that.
Yeah.
And, if there's two kind of things, right? There's a group of people who get absolutely upset that I'm not saying anything, but then there's the other group of people who get upset when I do say something. And, it's from the same community. So it's... You can't win. With social media, I've just realized that I cannot win because when I say something, people get upset. When I do not say something, people are like, oh, your silence is very telling. It's like, well, what do? I can't win. And you just have to live with that. So that's the dilemma of having a social media platform. Yeah, I personally have not figured out a way around it, but I think with age comes this personality of not caring. And I think the only way for me to have a social media platform and enjoy having that social media platform is to not care.
Doing it for you instead of for others.
Well, I spent 5 years. I spent a good 5 years of my life for others, and I think you can't really help others if you yourself don't feel good. Yeah, and after banning conversion therapy, I did not feel good.
Yeah. What does it feel like having a platform with NZME, which is, well, do I have to...
No, don't say that.
No, I won't say it. They're my boss. Yeah.
I was brought into the Herald because I was a trans person of colour. There's no doubt about that. I was told that. They were looking for diverse voices, and so that's why I was brought in. But I think it's really interesting because the readers are conservative people, tend to be right-wingers. And, when I write a column, and it could be a column about climate change, people do not follow the substance in the article. They're not criticizing what I've written, they're criticizing who I am. So a lot of the times you'd have like a column on, climate change, and someone would be like, what does this groomer know about climate change? So it's nothing to do about, what I've written. It's got more to do with who I am.
Yeah.
And that's been an interesting one, is that, people who are upset with you do not want to debate your ideas. They want to debate your identity. And I will not take debates about my identity. The blog button is very useful on the internet. But I think it's also incredible in the sense that I have messages from old people who are like, oh, I really appreciated this column you wrote. And I'm like, this is great. Like, I am reaching a group of people who wouldn't have otherwise read my work. And I am a true believer of not preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times you can stay in your echo chamber and it makes you feel very good because people agree with you, people applaud you for saying the things you say, and you just aren't challenged, you're comfortable. We're not going to change anyone's mind. By doing that, we change minds by educating people, and I think the column in the Herald gives me an opportunity to reach people who don't agree with me. Most of them don't agree with me. And then we start getting messages and emails saying that, oh, I read this and I really appreciated the view, even though I didn't agree with it. I think that's a step towards educating people.
Yeah. The thing I love about you, Shaneel, is that you do not sugarcoat.
Oh,
you say it like it is.
No.
And...
Yes.
You
know what? I think, it's really interesting because I've got this personality, and a lot of people project this personality of a really aggressive person onto me. But I'm not aggressive at all. I just say things without filtering it or without adding all of these other filler words to make things nice. And people on the internet often assume that I'm aggressive. And I get people who tell me that, oh, you're actually really soft-spoken or you're really gentle when they meet me in person. And I've always been like this. I get angry once in a while. But I don't think I'm aggressive, and it's been really interesting for me to see how people have read my columns, and they read my columns with this already preconceived idea of me being angry. So I could write something really, simple, but people would read it in an angry tone and then get upset with me because they think I was angry to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think that I see that on social media a lot of the times. People assume that I'm upset and this aggressive brown person, and I'm like, well, I'm not upset or angry at all.
Yeah.
And people just keep projecting this idea onto me, and I'm like, I don't.
You can be passionate without being ferociously aggressive about something. Yeah.
I mean, I personally do not have the energy to be aggressive. I'm just tired. I'm more tired, and if I wanted to be aggressive, I don't have the energy.
But that's just it, isn't it? When you're fed up and you're tired, you will just say it like it is. And it's not, it's without any intent of aggression or malice. It's just, it is what it is. And yeah. I can hear that coming through. Something you say. Do you think the advocacy of those that have come before you have helped you excel in the fields that you're moving into and that you're living right now? How does that affect you?
Absolutely, because, just 33 years ago, homosexuality was a crime. Had those people back then, people like Whainahuia, hadn't they fought to decriminalise homosexuality, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. Because we'd be criminals.
Yes.
And and then came people like Whaia Georgina, who became the first ever trans mayor and member of parliament in the world. She allowed trans people and queer people to see themselves as politicians, as, members of parliament, as mayors, as leaders. And that gave an entire generation of queer and trans people hope that they too could do that. And then we had people like Whaia Louisa Wall, who, was absolutely foundational in allowing same-sex marriage in Aotearoa. So it's, every single generation has contributed to the progress of queer communities.
What do you think previous generations have built, and what space has that created for you and your generation?
The biggest things would be the decriminalisation of homosexuality and then allowing same-sex marriage. I guess previously it was, in the past it was so pressing that they had to quite literally work on laws. I don't really think it was a matter of spaces. The conversation for safe spaces are just happening, so I don't really think there are spaces per se, but they were kind of, doing the groundwork.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't really have a space while it was a crime.
Yeah. From all of that history, where does that place you now? How do you carry that with you? Into your spaces that you're working in?
I think queer people, we come with a legacy, and that's a legacy of, resisting and fighting back. And all of the generations of queer people who have come before us, such as Whainahuia and Louisa and Whaia Felicia, all of these people, they've done the groundwork to allow us to exist.
Yeah.
And now it's our time to stop just surviving and start thriving.
To you, what is the definition of trans for you?
Simply put, anyone who tells me actually, maybe that's too simple. What is the definition of trans? Do you have a do you truthfully have a definition? Because I don't have a definition.
For me, I personally,
I don't know why I'm bleeding.
It's definitely not the conversation that a lot of our elders are having, and God bless them, and they're allowed to have that
a break.
that idea of what they perceive as trans. I believe if you are in transition to the identity that you prefer and that you are, that is what I believe classifies you as trans. So if you are, and if you have changed your name, if you do the operations, if you are changing your passport, if you are addressing to people that this is my identity now, if you're addressing to yourself, this is my identity now, then that is what I classify as a trans person, because you're transitioning from one thing to another. But that,
my definition would probably be much more simple, and that's that if someone tells me they are trans, that's enough for me. Yeah, and I think I have no autonomy or authority over other people's identity. And I think I've learned that because it was so difficult for me to find myself and live as my true self. And so I understand that it's actually really difficult for a trans person to say they are trans. I don't think anyone would lie about being trans, because it is so difficult to be trans, and I don't think anyone would just, want a little bit of that sweet bullying.
yeah.
I think it's really contentious, though. I believe there's a divide between the older trans people and younger trans people, that the older trans people believe that you need to have medically transitioned to be trans, and you need to be in the binary of man and woman. So 1, you need to have medical transition, and 2, you need to stick with the binary of man and woman. So if you haven't had medical transition, or if you identify as non-binary or outside the binary of man and woman, then you're not trans. And I think that's the real difficulty between the older trans people and younger trans people, because I think younger trans people are so much more open to this idea of you can be trans without having operations. You can be trans. I think young people are more open to the idea that you can be trans without having operations, or you can be trans and be outside the binary of man and woman. But I also think this idea of you must have surgery to be trans is a bit of a Western colonial concept. Because a lot of hijra, a lot of Vakasalewa, actually most Vakasalewa and most hijra do not have operations. And they live their lives without having operations or without having medically transitioned, and they are trans. Who are white people to tell indigenous queer people that they are not trans, or that they are not Vakasalewa, or that they're not hijra because they haven't had the operations? I mean, indigenous queer people existed much before colonization happened. Our identities didn't begin at colonization, so why should we start allowing white people to tell us how we can and cannot identify? I think that this is a real generational divide, and I think we'll just have to let a lot of old trans people live with their idea of what a trans person is, and just safeguard younger trans people from that viewpoint.
Because like you've said, I feel like this generation that comes with you, that is coming into this forefront right now, have that way of thinking, and I think in doing so, it just opens more people up to not. There's always a level of stress that comes when you're thinking you're transitioning or you're going to transition. So by what you guys are doing, in a way, essentially, is just softening the load for those people who just don't have the means to be able to do everything and transitions perfectly at any given time. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
In New Zealand, to be able to take hormones, you have to go through at least 6 steps. You need to see a hormone specialist, you have to see a GP, you have to see a psychologist, and the wait list is crazy. Hormone blockers and testosterone and, all of the other hormone replacement therapies that you can get are prescription-based. They're not cosmetic. You have to go through the process to be able to access all of these medicines. And if a person is on a wait list and truly believes they are trans, you can't tell them they're not trans. You can't tell a trans person they are not trans because the wait list is long.
Well, that moves me into my next question. How important is it for families to recognise this in their children and support them by any means necessary?
When I was involved in the movement to ban conversion therapy, I was actively looking for stats to show us, how did conversion therapy affect young people. And I found that when parents were involved in stopping their children from being trans, it almost tripled their depression rates and almost doubled their suicide rates. So what we know is that if parents are involved in stopping their children from being trans, their young children are so much more likely to be depressed or so much more likely to attempt to kill themselves. So if that's not bad enough, I don't know what is.
What would you say to those parents that just aren't sure or don't know or in that phase of shouldn't I? How can we help support those people?
I think the thing we need to tell parents is that your child knows themselves better than the people in your ear. It's not your responsibility to be the parent that society wants you to be. It's your responsibility to be the parent that your child needs you to be. And a lot of the times people are so worried about what society may think about their parenting ability, but it doesn't matter what society thinks if your child isn't even alive at the end of the day. What's important is that your child is happy, your child is well, because the other option is a dead child.
And also allowing for the quality of life that they're living in right now is living to the utmost potential that they possibly can. And I think by doing so, parents help with improving their child.
Yeah, and I remember hearing this story about, I was listening to this parent talk about their child, and they said that the church told them that you could either accept the church or accept your child. And the parent was like, what does it mean to not accept your child? Like, I don't even know what that means. So I think at the end of the day, parents just need to, sit back and think about what's important in their life. What strangers think, or what your child is going through.
What do you think? Has it gotten easier for us or harder? What do you think? Where are we at in this current climate?
I would say it's definitely gotten better, because I think it's easier for me to be me today than it would have been for me to be me 30 years ago. I think the police are not chasing us down the street with a baton because you're wearing the wrong piece of clothing, or the police are not raiding our bars because two men are kissing. It's, for most part, it's okay to be visibly yourself today. And I think we do a disservice to older generations of queer and trans people by implying that they haven't made it easier for us to exist. So I think relatively, yes, it's easier, but objectively, compared to, heterosexual people and cisgender people, no, it's not easy.
There is almost a movement in America with these conservative people. How concerned should we be about that rhetoric that's happening over there coming here?
One of the things that I really fear about my generation is that we're becoming increasingly polarized. There's no compromise and there's no negotiation. There's no center. There's the extreme left and the extreme right, and obviously the extreme left is not the same as the extreme right. One group is saying we all deserve to live, and the other one is saying you're not allowed to live. And I think there is a real possibility that we will adopt a lot of the right-wing American views in Aotearoa New Zealand. One of the things that we saw in the States was that conservatives were protesting drag queens in public libraries, and that started happening in New Zealand. So we've already adopted a lot of the anti-trans, anti-drag queen rhetoric in Aotearoa New Zealand. But we also saw that Rainbow Youth just got burnt down. Gloria of Greymouth got vandalized with anti-Semitic signs and a burnt pride flag. Bethlehem College was alleged of conversion therapy. there is an increase in anti-queer hatred and violence. And that's happened in the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I fear that as we become more and more polarized, as our political parties move further to the right and further to the left, we'll see more of an increase in that.
Do you think, because there have been conversations that I've had with other trans people about this idea of you can be an ally, but almost perpetuating situations a little bit more than they need to.
I know
How do you feel about that?
You're talking about the trademark?
Yes, well, I'm talking about a few things, but yeah, that could be.
Oh God, I think it's a really difficult one because obviously the queer community has long said that the allies need to step up. And I think sometimes the allies need to step up from where they are at. But some people have mistaken step up from, I think some allies have mistaken step up to step on. And so instead of...
Did you hear that?
And instead of standing beside us and behind us, they're standing in front of us and on top of us. And they're taking away opportunities from us, they're taking away resources from us, they're taking away jobs from us. There are allies in the queer community, who have trademarked terms that are for the queer community. And when an ally goes and trademarks a term that is a queer term, the only person that can use that term is the ally. Essentially, that has the effect of excluding all queer people from using that term.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about what exactly the situation is because it's in the public. Like, the trademark is public. Everything's public.
Any concrete, specific examples are good.
Yeah, it's all in the public. You can go on the trademark website and I wrote a column about this. It's currently sitting with the editor.
Oh.
And any other examples of where you feel that allies are perhaps overstepping the mark?
It's something as simple as I read an article the other day where Natural Woman by Aretha Franklin is getting, or people are trying to cancel it because Natural Woman is potentially excluding people that aren't natural women.
I mean, Aretha Franklin wasn't really singing about biology, was she?
Yeah, she wasn't. But the discussions didn't really stem from trans people in particular. It's hijacking from our allies.
It's not even allies. It's not allies. It's right wingers who want to make us look like snowflakes. So they pretend to be allies, and then they make us look like crazy people by starting all this rant. Personally, I do not give a shit. Aretha Franklin was singing about natural women. I don't think she was singing about biology. She was, singing about the feeling. And I think what often happens is that queer people do not have a problem with something like Natural Woman as a song. So what right-wingers do, or what conservatives do, they pretend to be allies and they say, oh, you know what, this is so offensive. And then that makes us look like crazy, intolerant people to the wider society.
Yes, because
that's
we're
what's
the
happening
ones
here.
at the end of the day that get scrutinized. It's not the blanket around it.
This might sound a bit... It's a bit of a controversial topic. Think about when Auckland Pride banned the police from coming to Pride in their uniform, right? A lot of that conversation was led by white, cisgender, gay men. But their reasoning was that brown and trans people don't feel comfortable. The agenda was theirs. The reasoning was us. So essentially, what the outside world saw was that brown trans people are intolerant.
Yeah.
The white gay men who led that conversation, who had that agenda, did not deal with any of the consequences of that conversation. We did.
Yeah.
So it's when people hijack conversations and use us as a reasoning to justify their action, we bear the brunt of the consequence of the backlash. A lot of the old white gay men, they took their money and their corporates and went and started another parade, and now people are celebrating them.
Yes.
Who's still on the firing line? Us. But let's talk about the trademark. And a community ally who is not queer, herself, trademark the term rainbow storytime. Essentially, rainbow storytime is drag queens reading books in public libraries.
Yeah.
And it's something that has been done for years and years before this ally came along and started doing it. So what they've essentially done is they've trademarked the term rainbow storytime, so you cannot use the term rainbow storytime to describe any entertainment service in New Zealand. So if I wanted to go and read book.
Sorry, pick it up from where you were. If I.
That's good. That sounds good.
Yeah.
If I, as a queer person, wanted to dress up as a drag queen and go to a library and read books to kids, I couldn't do that under the name Rainbow Storytime because an ally has trademarked the term and now owns the term. So, sometimes allyship is
can be a hindrance.
You can take away from the community. I mean, obviously this person says that they are doing it to protect their business.
But at what cost, I guess?
Yeah.
That's the question. So I want to move to something a little bit more positive.
let's do it.
What is your what are your wishes for the trans community?
When I was growing up in Fiji, I thought that my life would begin and end with hiding. I did not ever imagine that I would get to live the life that I get to live right now. So what I say to a lot of queer and trans children who are fighting to live another day is to keep fighting. Because you never know when your life will change. And when your life changes, it changes for the better. Mine changed, and the possibility of my life changing was next to none. And I guess my hope for a lot of young queer and trans folk is that they get to grow up in a world where their identity isn't something they have to think about. It's just who they are, and they go on about it like, they have long hair or they have short hair. I just want it to be such a normal part of their identity that it doesn't cause them distress, but it's not just something they think about. Yeah,
They just can be.
Yeah, they just can be. I think this idea of celebrating trans people and queer people is a brilliant idea. But the reason why we always have to constantly celebrate ourselves and support ourselves is because for so long we haven't been. For so long we have been under attack. And I think we'll only really need support and celebration if we're still under attack. I think there is room for us to come together and have a sense of community, but I would really like young people to not have to think about their identity at all.
Absolutely. You've written a book.
Yes.
Yet to be released.
Well, it will be released by the time. So you don't have to. Yeah.
You've written a book. Speak to that. Is it about your experience? It's about your life? How dramatic must have that been to have gone through from day dot to where you stand now?
I think writing was really healing. Oh God, my senses are so heightened.
Is it good?
Is that good? No, I was sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, I think writing a book was a part of healing myself. I had never really processed what I had been through in Fiji. So when I started writing about it, I started reflecting on all of my experiences and realized that it was not okay. The things that happened to me were not okay, and that I wasn't okay with them. The book is called One of Them. And it's obviously a reference to, me being one of those people, but also my pronouns that I'm one of they, them.
Yeah.
And the book really starts with me growing up in Fiji and just being a carefree child until I was no longer allowed to be carefree. I went into conversion therapy really early, and I wrote about it in a very detailed way. And I talk about, my first crush and my first heartbreak, and then moving to, those things that you kind of do when you're young, and then moving to Aotearoa, and then, finding myself and finding who I was and coming out as gay and then realizing I wasn't really a cisgender man, and that complexity of having to come out again, and then being offered conversion therapy, then getting involved in the movement to ban conversion therapy, and then after having banned it, feeling like I did not have an identity. So the book is actually quite detailed, and it covers quite a bit of my life. And I think all the people who've had questions about, my cultural identity or my trans identity should read it.
Out now.
One of them in stores now.
Yeah.
No, everyone knows not to cross me.
Everybody say, good behaviour.
People like when they meet me, they know that I think I'm gentle, right? Because I don't know how I come across.
Well, I haven't. Like the video that I've seen of you where you have confronted people, I've not received that, Shaneel.
Yeah, because that's happened once, and that happened because because they were like approaching, like, it was the 2021 Pride March, and a lot of these, Christian preachers were at the Pride March, and they were approaching kids and telling them that God hates sin and God hates sinners. You don't put up with behavior like that. Nope. I don't put up with behavior like that, and you don't see me lip syncing to Raining Men outside the church on Sunday, do you?
No.
You don't see me jump splitting from the roof of the church to Raining Men on Sundays when they're doing their preaching.
Yeah, as the priest is coming out, you're not going, yes, honey.
Yeah. And it's seriously damaging. You have a young child there who's questioning their identity and has come to Pride for the first time, and then they see someone there telling them that they will burn in hell for the rest of their life. That's what I saw. That's what I saw with Vicky, and because I saw no one step up and help Vicky, I thought that no one would step up and help me. So a lot of this is my childhood. I'm doing things that I would have liked other people to do when I was a child.
Yeah. So how was it, your experience with school here? You've spoken about the fights.
Yes.
Of all fights. But was there more information available to you? Were you accepted a bit more here in New Zealand schools? How did that work?
School really was a bittersweet experience, right? Because when I started high school, in year 9 and year 10, PE was compulsory. So you'd have to play sport. And I dreaded it. Because, they were divided into girls and boys, and you would have to be in the gym with the boys. And the ugliest ones thought that they were the prettiest and that you were somehow, trying to flirt with them or have a crush on them. So they would always make you feel like a bit of a perv for just being in the same room as them. And I hated it. I hated PE so much. I once wrote a letter to my PE teacher pretending to be my parents, and I wrote that my uncle had drowned and died, so I couldn't do swimming.
Okay, and how did that go?
Well, I think my PE teacher appreciated that I was not doing swimming. Because it just made his life so much easier to not have me around. Because a lot of these people were just putting up with me.
But there you go right there.
Yeah.
Teachers were doing that.
Yeah, people.
Which is, made their job easier, but
made their job easier because
it made everything else harder.
Because I don't think they wanted to tell the rugby boys that they shouldn't be homophobic. They didn't want to pull up the cool rugby boys and say, "Hey boys, don't do this," because that made them look bad. That put them in the boys' uncool books. So the teachers were quite worried about their reputation when I was, trying to play PE. But, I often wagged classes, did not take change. So I'd be like, "Oh, you're not allowed to play PE because you did not bring the uniform to play PE." Well, great for me. Thank you. I won't play it. And then I avoided swimming by saying someone had died. Well,
my goodness.
But in year 12, I came across an English teacher, and I think the English teachers were always the radicals. They loved their gays. And I was writing my speech, and she said, why don't you write your speech about whether trans women should be allowed to participate in women's sports? She really supported me, and I think that was a good way for me to find my voice. And because I was already in a conservative school where these ideas of being queer and trans and gay were not accepted, having the support of a teacher was really helpful. And I did my speech, and I got an E8. That's how they marked they marked E8 was an excellence, but an high excellence. So that's how they did our speeches. And I was like, oh, this is good. I think at the time I wasn't really an academic of any kind or intellectual of any kind, and so being able to articulate a point of view, an argument, was me finding my voice.
Yeah.
But then also there were like experiences where, when I was in high school, Laurel Hubbard had just become a big deal. She was a weightlifter, and one of my biology teachers put up a picture of Laurel Hubbard in class and started yelling, "That's a man," in the middle of a class. And I just thought, ooh, why is she doing that? Does she know because I'm trans or I'm queer? Is she doing that because of that reason, or is she doing that because I did a speech about why trans women should be allowed to participate in sports? So I think there were a lot of experiences where I was, finding who I am, but also people were pushing back on the idea of me living as my true self. But also there were experiences that had nothing to do with my queerness that were really building my character. For example, I became a librarian, and as a librarian you would get a badge. And as a young person in high school, having a badge was actually quite a big deal. I have a jersey somewhere that's literally just full of badges because I was collecting them. And my librarian, the head librarian, was giving out badges, and she ran out of them. And she would order some and just give them out, order some and give them out, and it was taking me a long time to get mine. Then I just walked into her office and I was like, "Where's my badge? Why is everyone getting their badge but me?" I just had an argument, and I think it just sounds so silly in hindsight, but that was me standing up for myself. And that obviously has nothing to do with my queer identity, but that was character development. And then at the end of year 12, the school's leadership team was sending out letters to students who would potentially become prefects, and I didn't get a letter, and I was angry. I was so angry. I wrote a letter to the principal explaining why I should be a prefect. Can you imagine? And the principal did not reply to my letter, so I went to his office. I walked into his office and I said, "Did you read my letter?" And then he said, "Yes." And he said that if I became a prefect, it would take away attention from the other prefects. And I was pissed, but that was the dead end. And I didn't become a prefect. And I did not appreciate at all having someone dictate my life or my fate in any way. So in year 13, at the beginning of the year, I walked into the principal's office and I said, "I want you to put down a criteria for how you're going to select the ducks." Now the ducks is the valedictorian or the top student academically. And I made him put down a criteria. And I said, "I'm not going to let you pull some last minute trick and not give me the ducks, because I know I'm going to get it." So I made him set a criteria, and I topped every single one of my papers, and I became the ducks. So, it's every single time someone's upset me, I've said, "I'm going to get you, and I'm going to get you good." But you know what, I guess the principal actually helped me quite a bit by not giving me the position of a prefect. Because had I been a prefect, I would have been so distracted and I would not have been able to become the ducks. And I guess the principal was also thinking that you're actually doing really well academically. Maybe you shouldn't add on this other thing that would potentially hinder your academic performance.
Yeah. I just hope for the future that there are ways to help you excel without having to fight against them. Like maybe if schools found a way to make you fight alongside them, that might be helpful. But look at you now.
You know, everything happens for a reason, and I'm actually quite grateful that I didn't become a prefect. Because had I become a prefect, I may not have gone on to become a youth MP. I may not have gone on to, you know, do a viral speech at youth parliament. I may not have done any of the things that I've done had I become a prefect. So in many ways, I'm very grateful my life played out the way it did. So I have no remorse, I have no resentments.
No regrets.
Yeah, I do not hold a grudge of any kind against the principal.
Good, because we're speaking tomorrow.
Good, because I have to go see him.
Yes.
No, but after I've left school, the principal has actually been quite nice. Has actually been really supportive in the sense that every time I need to do something at the school, he's actually quite excited about me going back.
Okay. I just want to say, oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry. I just want to say that knowing that we have a generation with people like you in it that is coming through, I think we're going to be a lot safer and a lot. We're going to be okay. And when I turned on the TV as a child, I never saw anybody like you. I never saw anybody like me. And so, knowing that the next generations to come are going to be so, be able to live authentically without any question or doubt is such a beautiful thing, and I think we've got a lot to thank to you for that, and a lot of the kids that are coming through that stand next to you. So, oh gosh,
thank you.
So thank you, and it's been such a privilege.
At the end of the day, it's all worth it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
A small part of a very big movement to freedom.
Mm-hmm.